Sermon of the Week, Boys2men, based on the book 2nd Chronicles. How long have I been king of this miserable Judean empire, he asked no one in particular. 8 great years, your highness, a stern but familiar voice answered. What have we accomplished? He, the king, asked. You have accomplished great things, my king, a soft male voice said. List them again for me, the king ordered. We just went over, I know, but go over them again, the king said, interrupting his court minister. Yes, your highness. Well, you have married the most beautiful woman in the Mediterranean world, the daughter of King Ahab, the minister said. In all the world, the king yelled at the top of his lungs. My apologies, your highness. In all the world, the court minister said. For that mistake you will hang in the morning, the king said. Guard, take him away. The silence that followed was deafening, but the king soon broke it. Now, who will tell me my accomplishments, he said in a slow, firm voice. Fearing further judgments, the vice minister stepped forward and said, Your victory over the Edomites is another. Your suppression of their revolt shows your military genius. The king broke into a smile. Yes, that was probably my singular moment. Egypt, Assyria, and even the king of Tyre sent me congratulatory letters. Applause broke out in the court. What else? The king said. Your club on the sea, Neptune's castle, is the talk of the entire world. Kings, queens, and princes from everywhere say it's the most enjoyable and exotic club they've ever visited. The king's smile widened. How much did we accrue from gambling this year? 25,000 talents of gold. And prostitution? 30,000 talents of gold. And the food and the hotel? 45,000 talents. Let's see, 25 plus 30, what did you say? 45,000. A total of 95,000 talents, your highness. Have plans drawn up for an expansion and put on my desk in the morning. We have to get into the six-figure realm next year. Yes, your highness. He turned and hurried out of the court. Jasmine, baby, please dance for me. I truly am the greatest. She kissed him, took center court, and the court musicians began to play the top tune of the day, Doing Just Fine. The kingdoms of men are as diverse as the 6,000 years of recorded history, but they do have a lot in common. They tend to govern with absolute power, the method often at the whim of their king. The queen or the king leans toward exercising total control of their domain in order to maintain their position as king or queen. Their position is precarious, as many want their throne and will do anything to obtain it. If their throne is an inherited position, they have a more stable situation, but still, history demonstrates that is not always the case. One of the greatest, if not the greatest playwright in history understood this point very well. William Shakespeare wrote many of his plays about the lives of the world's kings and queens. He realized that their position left them vulnerable to graft, corruption, deceit, and immorality. His study of these interesting historical figures fascinates each and every succeeding generation and are timeless. The prophets of the Bible also recorded the actions of many of history's kings and queens. If you take time to read about these figures, you come to realize that they governed their kingdoms not unlike those of Shakespeare or those of more recent times. The first lineage was that of the Egyptians, and the archaeological finds have shown that though the kingdom of Egypt ruled the world for some 2,000 years, all was not peace and prosperity. Wars, including civil wars, famines, slavery, insurrection, and assassination, are all in the record. In fact, their most famous king, King Tut, died at a young age and likely was murdered. Likewise, the Egyptian slaves who would become the nation of Israel have a history that is almost as unimaginable in its scope of evil and repeated failures. The prophets give more detail than we have for Egypt, but the adage that history repeats itself is never more true than in the history of the kingdom of Israel. Rehoboam, the king we spoke of earlier, had a most impressive pedigree. He was the son of the wisest, richest, and arguably the greatest kings of Israel, if not the entire world. But when he took office after his father's death, he instituted policies against the will of his God. Rather, he set up policies against simple, sound reason, thus dooming his kingdom to struggle and eventually fail. At his coronation, Jeroboam, one of the civic leaders, had a conference with Rehoboam. Jeroboam asked that Rehoboam cut back the strenuous workload that Solomon had given Israel with all his building and military endeavors. Rehoboam told Jeroboam he would think on it for 3 days. After 3 days, the new king Rehoboam told him that rather than decrease the Israelite workload, he would increase it. He said instead of using whips, he'd use scorpions to keep them working. As you might expect, this didn't sit well with anyone. The rift that followed eventually led to the formation of 2 separate nations, Judah under Rehoboam and Israel comprised of 10 tribes under Jeroboam. And we all know what a divided house does. It took about 300 more years, but the king Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon conquered the divided nation in 605 BC. It would not again become a sovereign nation for 2,520 years. The Book of Chronicles is a fascinating history of this period, not unlike the currently popular series Game of Thrones. No doubt some ideas were gleaned from these books. Ahaziah was king of Judah, a few kings down from Rehoboam. He reigned 1 year and was assassinated. His mother then had all the heirs to the throne murdered, and she assumed the throne in Jerusalem. But there was one kink in her plans. She somehow missed one of the heirs. 1-year-old Joash was spirited away, and when the very corrupt and incompetent Athaliah was assassinated 6 years later, Joash, who was now 7 years old, was crowned king. Joash set about repairing the damage of Athaliah, but as he grew older, he eased back into her methods of governing. When God sent the prophet Zechariah to admonish him to return to the proper way of governing, Joash had Zechariah killed. It was not long until this corrupt form of government caught up with Joash, and the Syrians attacked and killed Joash. He was 48 years old. The Bible repeatedly sends prophets to its leaders to turn them away from idols and back to worshiping the true God, but in fact, if one governs properly and uses his conscience to guide him, he will follow God and not worship rocks and animals. It's all common sense. As simple as it sounds, it seems so very difficult for humans to do. What is in us that makes us enjoy evil? Where is that need to experiment with immorality, drugs, thievery, torture, murder? How is it that we can enjoy such life-threatening activities? Is it the brief high, or is it the feeling of accomplishing something we aren't supposed to? The need to move away from what we know is right, or the correct path, if you will, seems to have been there from the beginning. Eve had it, Adam had it, and certainly the number 3 guy, Cain, had it. What is it? How can we define it? Moreover, how can we overcome it or get rid of it? This planet's history is flooded with boy kings. Ivan V became Tsar of Russia at age 16. Eventually, his half-brother, Peter the Great, seized power. Marcus Aurelius ruled Rome at age 14. Murad IV became ruler of the Ottoman Empire at age 11 and ruled with an iron fist. Baby Doc was declared president of Haiti at age 19 and embezzled $800 million from his country. Edward VI was 10 when he became king after his father Henry VIII passed away. He died of tuberculosis at age 16. Fuad II became king of Egypt at 1 year of age, but within a year, Egypt became a republic. The list is endless, and the result is universally the same. Boys cannot be successful kings. It takes a man to be a king and a woman to be a queen. But what is man or woman? When do they attain that status? It certainly is not age, as many of us never grow up. Oh yes, lest we forget. Judah had several more boy kings. Manasseh was crowned at age 12 and ruled in a corrupt manner for 55 years. 2 Chronicles 33:1. Josiah was crowned at 8 years and ruled 31 more in what is described as right in the sight of the Lord. 2 Chronicles 34:1. A series of several more kings ruled Judah. All the while, the king of the number 1 power in the world, Nebuchadnezzar, watched the proceedings from a distance. He was aware of the history of Judah and the miracles of its God. He did not want to go up against such a force. But as he watched year after year, he realized that the kingdom of Judah was more corrupt than any on earth and openly despised their God. Finally, he marched on the kingdom of Judah and virtually walked in, taking control in 605 BC. As the book of Daniel points out, he probably regretted it for the remainder of his life. Back to that burning question, what makes us enjoy evil? Billions are spent on finding the answer to this question in those who practice evil. When we are born, among the many miraculous things we are given is a conscience. Science is not sure how to define it. Neuroscience is trying to locate it in our brains in hopes of modifying our proclivity to go against it. Even as a baby, we are able to discern what is bad and what is good, what is hot, what will burn us and what is not. Our conscience is modified and molded by our parents, our caregivers, but even so, deep down, we understand what is right and what is wrong all by ourselves. What is good for us, what is bad for us. So why do we seem to often revel in going against our conscience? Little Eve in Eden had a conscience. We are told the serpent influenced her to disobey and take that bite. But I'm convinced that if there had been no serpent, eventually she would have taken that bite all by herself. Why? You say curiosity? Come now. She had 1,000,000 fruits to choose from, and by the time she took that bite, she had likely only sampled a few thousand. No, she didn't need the serpent to influence her. She didn't need her dear husband Adam to influence her. She took that bite all by herself, of her own free will, against her own conscience. Again, I say, why? All we really have to do is look around our world. The answer stares us all in the face every day. What happens to people who follow their conscience? What happens to people who don't? You all know the answer. Those who follow what they know to be right generally have a smoother life than those who don't. No, it's not every time, but the more you do what you perceive to be right, the better is your path. History is full of this same information. Over and over again, those that follow their conscience seem to do better than those who don't. I grant you it's uneven, but history is littered with the bodies of those who wantonly went against their conscience. Sadly, because of their choices, millions who tried to follow their conscience also suffered. Again, I say why. The prophet Isaiah gives us the one-word answer, "For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of congregation in the sight of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be the most high." Isaiah 14:13 and 14. What's the key word here? Ascend. What's its meaning? To climb, to rise. But the best definition I found is to ascend to power. God is God. He created all. He created Lucifer. Lucifer had a conscience and far more brain power than we. Yet his own mind eventually wore down his conscience. He came to believe that he also was a god and should have all that God had. What do we sing over and over again? Thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory. What does it say? It's all God's. Once Lucifer's mind overcame his conscience, he decided to take matters into his own capable hands and ascend to power. The more he thought about it, the bolder he became. Finally, everything in heaven came to a head, and the result was, yes, war. And the result of that war, yes, Lucifer lost. Why did he lose? Because he wasn't God. God was God. God is God. Angels are angels. Eve was Eve. Humans are humans. We can't ascend out of who we are. Universal law doesn't allow it. And without the universe, there's nothing anyway. We are nothing. We can't jump out of an airplane without a parachute and survive. If we are to survive, we must listen to our conscience. This all sounds so complicated. How can anyone do what's right all the time? Life is just too hard. There's so much evil mixed in with all the good. But there is a way. There is a very simple answer as to how to not enjoy evil. Luke 10:27. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy strength, and with all thy mind, and what? Thy neighbor as thyself. So simple, yet so beautiful. You will argue that even this is impossible. But the good news is that somebody actually did it. They actually followed the golden rule for their entire life on earth, and their life was by no means a picnic. A human being, born out of wedlock, illegal alien as a child, lived in poverty, ridiculed by family, jobless, homeless, prime target of the devil for 33 years, starvation, fugitive from the law, friendless, called every name in the book, tried and convicted of treason, tortured mercilessly, put to death by the most cruel of methods. Yet this guy did it. He followed Luke 10:27. We as humans have no excuse. He did it. Certainly we can do it. Take the time today to quit trying to ascend. Turn to being who you are and care for your God, yourself, and your neighbor. This is all you have to do to be guaranteed your place in the eternal new earth.